On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Jonathan Myron. He is the VP of Engineering at Healthie. We're going to be talking about working with founders. So obviously, if you're in engineering leadership and you are working at a startup, you're going to be working with founders and you're going to have to work to translate that vision into reality. So implementing the vision, translating it into engineering culture. And also we're going to talk about that founder imprint because the founders obviously have certain thoughts on how the company is going to be run and how does that translate to your engineering culture. Jonathan, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Amir. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. Before we start, tell everyone what Healthie does.
Yeah, so Healthie is an all-in-one practice management solution for any of the healthcare that takes place outside the hospital. So if you can think about nutrition, behavioral health, women's health, and any number of different types of care, it's an all-in-one practice management solution for all those people that have started their own practice, whether they're small businesses or larger enterprises. We've got a solution for them.
This topic, working with founders. So obviously, in the spirit of being an engineering leader, obviously you're working with founders. And one of the things that we were speaking about is obviously depending on the size of the org, right? Maybe we can even reference that. But depending on the size of the org, there is some dynamic in terms of being an engineering leader and working with founders. So maybe we could start off with that and just talk about you as an engineering leader when you do join a startup and we can maybe think about earlier stage startups just to give everyone a frame of reference at what we're talking about. That relationship, tell us a little bit about the early stages of that relationship working directly with founders.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the most important thing is to understand why a founder started the company in the first place. Founders have a vision, and it's not easy to start a company. It's one of the most difficult things people can do. Really, starting with something from nothing and then building a company and then taking on all that stress and being responsible for people's paychecks, it's a huge undertaking. So I think for any kind of leader, but certainly if you're talking about engineering leadership, understanding why somebody started the company, what their vision was, what their goal, and really imagining yourself being the one to help implement that. I think that's just so crucial.
And I guess when you're joining a company, and maybe just a side question, and you're interviewing and you're obviously being interviewed, in the process where you're trying to understand how the founder's vision, their goals, their aspirations, how that aligns for you, again, taking a little bit step back, but how do you suss that out during the interview process? Make sure that you are going to have alignment once you actually get in the door and actually start.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of it comes down to really can you imagine yourself there? Can you imagine yourself working with this person on a daily basis? There's a culture fit and there's a human angle to it. It's, some people you're going to mesh with immediately. Other people, they may have a complementary personality. And I think, you have to be bought into what they're doing, and you have to really say, I'm going to be spending so much time with this person. Do I really see do I see so much of my time being occupied, working with these people directly and helping to make their company work and make their vision come to life?
Talking about that vision, obviously, the founders have that in their minds. They're trying to build the company out based on that vision. You're, by extension, trying to implement that vision. Talk to us a little bit about that process of trying to take that vision, take the kernel of the idea, and actually work with the engineering team to bring it to life. And not as from just the engineering perspective, but actually making sure your team fully embraces that vision, understands the bit of the why behind it, what they're doing.
I think for any company, if you're an engineering leader there, you have to fully understand that product. And so I think it's very easy to get caught up in the tunnel vision of looking at it as a purely technical pursuit. And if you understand the product, if you're bought into the mission, then your team needs to be thinking that same way. So that's part of the mentorship. Just in the same way, you're going to help somebody become a great engineer by teaching them how to code better, reviewing their code, all the steps you're going to give them while they work on the actual art of being an engineer. part of that is actually making sure that they understand what the company does, where it fits into the big picture, and what their part of it is.
So I guess one question that comes up is we've been talking about the vision, and you have to translate that into metrics to support the vision. Is there a way to actually see into the metrics to see how the vision is being supported? Is that something that's possible?
So I think the metrics tell a story. There's any of the standardized metrics that engineering teams look at. They're always looking at their velocity. They're looking at the change failure rate. All of that tells a story, though. I like to be able to survey my teams. And, I don't know if you're familiar with the Westrom survey, but it looks at six different axes to find out if people feel like their opinions are heard, if they feel like, they can share difficult information. And so you want to really make all of this really comes down to like developer happiness, and you want to get a good understanding. Do people feel engaged? Do they feel a sense of autonomy? Do they feel like they can actually make a difference? And so I think this is really a lot of what I look for when I'm working with engineering teams. It's definitely the metrics count, but I think performance metrics cannot be looked at in a vacuum of just simply like something punitive. It's got to actually have something meaningful behind it. And if you're an engineering leader and you don't see numbers going in the direction you want, I think there's usually a deeper question of why.
When you talk about engineering happiness, and obviously your goal is to, as you said, there's a survey that you provide, you're trying to understand that. In the context of the engineering culture that is being created, and obviously that's dynamic to the size of the company, how do you shape that engineering culture with that feedback you're getting from your survey?
Well, I think engineering it's ultimately a creative pursuit. I think people that, especially for internet companies, it's this really cool convergence of a scientific pursuit mixed with something creative. People want to build, they want to do something amazing. And I think if the expectations are well understood and you're hiring people that have a good sense of ownership and accountability, that if given the autonomy to do great things and the expectations of what of what success is, they can build amazing things that way. So it's really what I look for in the people that I bring onto my teams, just that combination of like a great engineer, but mixed with somebody who loves what the company is doing, and they're always looking to grow and build upon their success. And I think my job as an engineering leader is really to try and foster new leaders within a team.
So obviously, founders, they imprint what they want the culture to be. So obviously they control a lot of aspects of the organizational culture. When you're working within your team and the engineering culture you're trying to promote, how do you align the two? Because obviously the founders are still very close to everything, right? As the company grows, there'll be more distance, and I think things get a little bit more separated. But early on, when they are more involved, when they are more visible, when they are more accessible, how do you align the founder's imprint on culture versus what you're hoping to achieve in the engineering culture itself?
I'm a big believer in what people call the founder's mentality. And I think, going back to that topic of like people started that business for a reason, if there's a great deal of empathy to what the founders are trying to achieve, if that becomes part of the daily conversation with engineering teams so that they understand what the business is trying to achieve and what the founders are trying to achieve with it, I think that goes a really long way. So that can be in the form of trying to bridge that gap. I think as a leader of a team, explaining to your teams why things might be a certain way goes a long way, because when people look at things in a vacuum and they might not understand why a certain request is being made, they may not understand why they've been given a certain project to do. So that sense of demystifying, sharing information, really being as transparent as is possible goes a long way with the teams.
So you've definitely been a part of a lot of SaaS software companies, different sizes, different industries as well. I guess you've kind of have some best practices as you look across the companies you've worked at. I guess as the founders vary, have you noticed any commonalities between your relationship with the founders that are consistent, or really is each founder so unique that you got to kind of learn each one on their own?
Well, I think definitely there's always that learning curve of truly getting to understand the personality of the people you're working with and what makes them tick and what makes them happy and how you fit into that mix. Definitely the commonalities that I've seen is like these are frequently, not frequently, I mean, across the board, these are always very intelligent people and very driven and don't have the same sense of failure that a lot of other people do. You know, they're oftentimes willing to say this is a setback and then to move forward. And I think like I've really spent a lot of time in my career working with founders, sort of opening myself to be inspired in the same way they are. You know, just understanding the things that might make them happy or might make them upset, and really saying like, what can I do to take one piece of this puzzle and take that off their shoulders and make their life a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I was interviewing somebody and they mentioned to always be looking to fill a need and don't worry about the outcome, because if you fill the need and you're driving value, the outcome takes care of itself. I almost heard something similar from you, and I think it's becoming more and more when I talk to engineering leaders. It's less about worrying about the outcome, but hey, let me find the area where I can best serve, go help do what I can, and then worry about the outcome later. Through your career, I guess, is that something where you've obviously had a and obviously we'll post your LinkedIn if you want, but you've been in leadership for a while and consistently being hired for various levels of leadership. So obviously you're delivering consistent value. People are seeing that leadership within you. When you kind of look at your own career and you look at how you drive value, are there some commonalities of what you look to do to drive value? Because I think a lot of times engineering leaders, they default to the metrics that they can point to, but I don't know if that's always driving value.
I always go back to, I've had a lot of conversations with people on this. When it comes to founders and the way that they contribute to what a company does, if you were to replace the things that they do as an individual contributor in their role, it might take a dozen people to do it. So when I enter a company and I'm trying to like see where I can add value, a lot of it is just low hanging fruit. A lot of it is like, let me do that for you. And it's the kind of thing where they're like, well, that's not difficult. It's like, but that's one less thing for you to do that I can help you with. And I think it's just sort of like that type of empathy. Because I'm not going to understand the full business and the full history and everything on day one. There's just a lot of nuance. There's a lot of complicated aspects especially if a company's been around for a while. But if I can start to take some of those things and make them my own, and not only am I able to show some value, but it gives them that extra little bit of breathing room where they can start to focus on other things.
I guess if you were to give advice to people looking to move into leadership, and a lot of people do go into startups and kind of move up with the org as the org grows. If you're going to give advice to people in that dynamic to help move into that leadership role, is there any advice that you've seen work for you that you could provide people listening?
I think the best advice I could give is put aside your own ego at every opportunity, put aside titles, and really think about leadership. Is when somebody's a leader, everybody knows it, and you don't need a title for that. They know who is getting stuff done. There's a lot of different ways to take leadership, and if you're an engineer, that might be by taking on a project and getting that done in a way that like is minimally disruptive, and you're taking ownership of it, and you're building trust where people will say like, wow, this is an amazing engineer, I want to give them a bigger project, or I want to have them work with additional people. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for engineers to show off their stuff. And really, like in the startup world, working with founders, it really comes down to like, you're not there because this is an organization with lots of titles and a clear matrix of how you grow from one role to another. If you're adding value, you're going to grow.
That's actually, I mean, I think that's fantastic advice. Obviously, if you're joining a startup that you're looking for that type of environment, do you yourself, and you've done a lot of startups, different size orgs, I guess maybe you haven't been at like large enterprises. Do you kind of excel in those environments where it is about putting your ego aside and just putting your head down and delivering value, or because I hate to label people startup people, because I think sometimes we have those labels, but some people love it and they're like, I enjoy some of the complexity and some of the ambiguity and that problem solving. Is that something that reflects true to you?
Yeah, certainly. In my career, I've learned that that's definitely where I thrive, and it's manifested in different ways over time. I think back about some of like the earliest jobs I did, where I, was maybe a 2 or 3 person company, and it was very involved, and I was, working directly with the founder, but also, maybe the singular engineer, and doing a lot of stuff that way, like really early stage. And that progressed through different stages of startups that were angel funded or further along their path. And that as a skill set is something that grows. It's not a static thing. And so I found that what worked very well for me earlier in my career for very early stage companies translated really nicely as I got further along in my career to being the kind of person that could take a company that's working, but take it to that next level, whatever their next big goal is for growth.
I think that's actually interesting to know yourself and to know what makes you tick and what is going to make you happy. And I think a lot of times people don't know that, and they think a certain company or a certain job or a certain title will do that. And I don't think that's actually true. I think you have to know the dynamic in which you actually excel and put yourself in those situations. Jonathan, I think, you've given us some great insights into actually was just working in the startup world, to be honest with you, and kind of being an engineering leader and how to kind of grow within that dynamic. I guess if somebody wants to pick your brain, I think we covered a lot of different areas maybe than we had anticipated, but we did cover a lot of ground. If somebody did want to reach out to you to ask you some advice career-wise, is there a good way of touching base with you?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to do it. Everybody's there, and you can easily find me on there, and I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll definitely include that in the show notes so that people can do that. And I definitely appreciate you being on. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, likewise. It was a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. One, obviously we talked a lot with Jonathan about working in startups, relationships to founders. Career-wise, what do you have to do to actually grow? And he actually has given us some great advice in terms of putting the ego aside and just finding how you could be the most valuable you can for a company. So I think some great advice at any stage of career, but especially if you're looking to move into leadership, I think he provides some great context. Reach out to him if you have a follow-up, and also share this episode with somebody else who might find it interesting. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.